Can you?
Yep.
Perfect. So I suppose after talking with Brian, he'd asked me to kind of do a webinar this month, and I know Mark is going to talk again at the AGM in a couple of weeks. But he wanted to kind of maybe kind of look at the subject of kind of staying healthy at home at the minute, and I suppose um so I suppose just to give a brief look, I'm going to go through kind of some aspects of staying healthy at home, specifically looking at kind of resources as well that you can maybe use. And then I'm going to talk at the end about the physiotherapy exercise class that we did last year that we ran and that we're hoping to run again on later this year. So I suppose staying healthy at home, kind of what does that mean? So at the minute, I suppose as a physio, physically, that means I suppose achieving what the World Health Organization physical activity guidelines would tell us. Um, Really, it's about moving more and sitting less. If I kind of literally think about from a physical activity point of view and from a physio point of view, um, we're made to move. We're not made to be sedentary. We're made to sit. And generally, if we do sit for too long, that's when we start to have issues. And when I start seeing people coming into me with different aches and pains. So I suppose specifically at the minute, the last 12 months, we've seen a huge kind of difference in maybe how people are working. And we've had, a huge number of you are working from home possibly. Um, but the important thing about that is that you're achieving that work life balance. And I think when I thought about that a little bit more, I suppose little tips that I suppose, I would give to a lot of people if they were kind of presenting with any kind of musculoskeletal issue. But, you know, really, no one should be sitting for longer than 30 minutes at a time. At that point, you really need to be standing up, even if it's only for a minute or 2 minutes. As I say to people, like previously, like literally walk out to the kitchen, get a glass of water, walk back in. Really, that's the kind of amount of time that you should be sitting from an ergonomic point of view, from a physical health point of view. Um, Definitely at the minute, I would say get outside every day and get some space, especially if you're working at home all the time. I would say you need to get out of you need to get out of the house. You need that headspace. You need the change of the change of point of view and just the change of location. And don't underestimate how important that is. I would definitely say don't tune into the news too much. Um, and I think we all have had a tendency to do that. At the minute, but do try and give yourself a break from it. Give a break from the social media, things like Twitter, all those things that are, turn off maybe alerts that you have, kind of maybe for any of those news stories and that. Like I know every evening at 6 o'clock, I pretty much check what's happened, the day COVID wise, but keep that in mind. And I would say at the end of the day, if you are working from home, try and make a break between closing that office door wherever you're working and the return to family life. So previously you would have had a commute maybe home in the car, walk, cycle, dart, bus, whichever. That gave you a bit of time to decompress and to kind of have that, in a way, that mental shift, moving from the office to home, or whatever you're working at. And even if you are going out from work, going out to work, even again, just making sure you're trying to leave that before you get back home. And I know the other thing would be, don't get drawn back into work. I think like I can even see it with my own husband, and he would have worked from home maybe one day a week previously, but he for the last year now has been working at home 5 days a week, and I can see him staying in the office much later than he would have if he was working in the office in town. I can see that he gets dragged back in and suddenly it's 10 o'clock at night, and he's still working. Or even on a day off, make sure that you block your emails or just mute them or whatever, but don't get drawn back into things when you're off work, if you have a day off. Or I think that's the most important thing, especially at the minute. um So previously, I know I've spoken in the past year, and even most recently, at the meeting in October, the AGM. So I spoke about the physical activity guidelines, but I suppose we were waiting on the new World Health Organization guidelines, which came out at the end of November, and there have been some changes. So the previous ones were actually 2010. So like they were a kind of, I suppose, a plan for the 10 years, and these ones are supposed to take us forward now for the kind of next kind of 10 years. So there have been changes. We would expect that. So previously, we would have been advised that we should undertake at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity or 75 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity per week. But that has changed. The 150 is a minimum now, and they're recommending 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity activity. And this is for all adults over the age of 18. This is, so I suppose 18 to 64. Actually, the over 64s are similar. This is the recommendation: 150 to 300 minutes of moderate intensity activity or 75 to 150 minutes of vigorous intensity physical activity. So that actually is a big change. The 150 is a minimum now that we should be trying to achieve, that moderate intensity activity. They're also recommending regular muscle strengthening activity for all age groups. But I suppose in the 18 to 64-year-olds, what they're recommending is that you do at least two of those muscle strengthening activities per week. And what they've, I suppose previously the guidelines would have been called physical activity guidelines, but now it's physical activity and sedentary behavior. So it's guidelines on sedentary behavior as well. And the idea is that we reduce our sedentary behavior. So that's, sitting, sitting in the car, anything where you're not moving, sitting at your desk, anything like that, watching the TV on your laptop on a screen. So that's again recommended across all age groups and abilities. And I will say that this includes, when they're giving these guidelines, this includes chronic diseases. So this would include all of us, anybody who has any kind of underlying kind of chronic condition. So haemophilia would fall into that. The evidence was insufficient to quantify the kind of sedentary behavior thresholds. They haven't been able to kind of say how much sedentary behavior, I suppose, you shouldn't be doing. But the important thing is that we try and reduce that. So what are the new guidelines telling us? Well, they're reaffirming the message that some physical activity is better than none, that more physical activity, the more we do, is better for optimal health outcomes. And again, as I said just a minute ago, it provides a new recommendation on reducing those sedentary behaviors. So, it's really important. They can see that the more physical activity you do, the more health benefits you're going to get. Now there is a cap at that when you get to like really high level kind of physical activity. But for the most of us, more physical activity is better, and that's only going to help to optimize our health outcomes. And it isn't even to prevent some of these kind of comorbidities, like things like cardiovascular disease, diabetes, obesity. It's actually to help improve, if we have any of these kind of underlying conditions, it's also to help improve those. So as well as prevention, it's also improvement. So I've taken this out of the guidelines just to kind of show you again. So adults aged 18 to 64 years, and that includes those with chronic conditions and those living with a disability. So in adults, higher amounts of sedentary behavior are associated with detrimental effects on your following health outcomes. So all-cause mortality, cardiovascular disease, so your high blood pressure, your high cholesterol, cancer mortality and incidence of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes and cancer. So as I said, adults should limit the amount of time spent being sedentary, and they should replace sedentary time with physical activity of any intensity. That's including light intensity. That is standing. It doesn't matter as long as you're not sedentary. Even standing makes a difference. And this provides the health benefits for all of the things I've mentioned above. It also, to help reduce the detrimental effects of high levels of sedentary behavior on health, adults should aim to do more than the recommended levels of moderate to vigorous physical activity. So when we look at the over 65s, again, including those with chronic conditions and those living with disability. In older adults, physical activity also helps prevent falls and falls-related injuries and declines in bone health and functional ability. So, we would have encouraged previously people, but they're even saying that those who would fall into kind of a frailty category, that actually the research would show us that even those who are falling into a frail category, to prevent falls and falls related injuries, we actually need them to become more physically active. So it's recommended in the over 65s that as part of their weekly physical activity, that they should do a varied multi-component physical activity that emphasizes functional balance and strength training at moderate or greater intensity on 3 or more days a week to enhance functional capacity and to prevent falls. So what I would definitely say is the important thing there is that for our over 65s, and I would probably say in the haemophilia population, we could probably bring that down a bit and kind of say, well, actually, probably over 50, over 55s, we need to be bringing in that functional balance training to, for me, for my patients and for the haemophilia population. I think we could bring that down a bit. So how are you going to kind of achieve these guidelines at home? So I suppose, firstly, if you're not currently meeting these recommendations, doing some physical activity will bring benefits to your health. You start with small amounts and you gradually increase the frequency, intensity, and duration over time. Older adults should be as physically active as their functional ability allows and adjust their level of effort for physical activity relative to their level of fitness. And when you're not able to meet the recommendations, adults with chronic conditions should aim to engage in physical activity according to their abilities. So everyone should be able to do something. And I suppose the important thing to remember as well is if you feel at the minute you're not, that you're really not anywhere close to these recommendations, maybe you're worried about starting anything, don't be. But if you are, I suppose, then you can always link in with your GP, you can link in with a physio, and get some advice and make sure that from a health point of view and a physical health point of view and ability, that they say, yeah, you're fine to do physical activity. There's nothing stopping you. And really, like even in the World Health Organization guidelines, they would say that you don't really need a medical kind of person to say, yeah, go and start, you're fine. But what I would say is if you're anyway worried, link in with the GP, link in with a physio. So I suppose for any of the patients who are in the National Coagulation Centre, you can link in with myself or Mark. We're very happy to give advice and kind of help you build up kind of nice and gently if you're introducing something new. And otherwise, definitely link in with your GP if you're worried about any kind of maybe blood pressure or anything like that, or if you feel you're on any medication and you're worried about how activity may affect it. It generally won't. And generally, I think everyone is very good at listening to their own body and what they're able for and what they're not. So I suppose that is that kind of take home message. So just to say again, the big difference in these new guidelines is the weekly range of recommended aerobic activity volume is a notable difference compared with the 2010 recommendations that only specified kind of that minimum weekly threshold. So like I said a minute ago, previously you would have said kind of, they recommended the 150 minutes of that moderate intensity activity. And now they're kind of saying that 150 is the minimum we should doing and really up to 300 minutes. So that's a big difference. And then with regard to the moderate vigorous physical activity bouts of any duration now count. So towards these recommendations, and that reflects kind of new evidence to support the value of your total physical activity volume regardless of the bout length. So I know anyone who's listened to any of these webinars over the past year that myself or Mark have given, or anybody who attended our exercise classes, we would very much have kind of said that you need to get at least 10 minutes of moderate physical activity to get a benefit. So now you don't. That's the, like, for me, and my advice to you tonight is that's gone. So if you feel that you're pushing that heart rate into the moderate, even for a minute or two, you can kind of count that, and kind of the next time you go again, another couple of minutes, 5 minutes maybe at that intensity. Great, I've done 7 minutes. It's accumulative. You don't have to do it all at once. So that was I think that's a a really good that's one good thing that's come out of these guidelines, because some people kind of thought, oh, trying to keep their heart rate up for 10 minutes, if maybe they have kind of maybe underlying arthropathy, might be difficult. Now, we showed in our exercise class that actually it wasn't that, that people were able to do that. But at the same note, feeling maybe that you can do 5 minutes and build that up is great. And ultimately, it just adds all together, which is brilliant. So I suppose just remembering that all adults should limit the amount of time spent sedentary, and we're great at probably thinking about the kids and kind of saying, oh no, they have to limit their screen time, but we're the same. We need to maybe, if I know my tendency is to sit on the sofa all evening and kind of throw on the TV, and what we need to be doing is kind of less time in front of the TV, less time in front of our own screens, and things like, I don't know if they do it on the Android, but things like on the iPhone, they tell you how much time per week, per month you've spent, per week, how long have you spent on your phone, and it can be kind of scary and worrying at times that you see how many maybe hours you've been spending on this, and that it's gone up or down from last week, and you're like, oh. So trying to limit that. So again, so that's just from the guidelines again. So at least 150 to 300 minutes of that moderate intensity aerobic physical activity, or at least 75 to 150 minutes of the vigorous intensity. For the 18 to 64-year-olds, they, and the over 65s, you need to be doing kind of 2 muscle strengthening activities at a moderate kind of intensity, at least, to involve all your major muscle groups. Limit the amount of time being sedentary and replace it with more physical activity of any intensity, and that's including light intensity. And then for our over 64-year-olds, but as I was saying earlier, I would definitely be saying you need to be doing some element of kind of functional balance work, probably in our over 50s, over 55-year-olds. It's only going to stand to you kind of for the future and reduce any falls risk. So some general rules for at home. My advice would be, do some physical activity that you like to do. There's no point, if you're going to say, oh, I'm going to start, I'm going to buy like a row, or I'm going to buy a bicycle, buy a treadmill. If you're not going to use it, don't waste the money. You can go out for a walk, even kind of go, okay, well, if that's the activity that I like to do, I enjoy it, well, I'll focus on the walking. Or if it's cycling, cycling. Don't kind of suddenly say, oh, I'm going to start this online class. If you don't enjoy it, don't, because you won't stick with it. And I suppose the idea is, what we want to do is we want to kind of change that behavior, and we want, once you're doing something for a number of weeks, it really becomes a part of your kind of normal routine, and that's what we ultimately want. You don't need fancy equipment. If you have a yoga mat, you don't even need that. TheraBand is great. It's a resistance exercise band, and anybody who attended the AGM and kind of did the class, I don't know, we did a class for that back in October. We sent out a piece of TheraBand to everybody. They come in different resistances. This is TheraBand itself, so it comes in yellow, red, green, blue, and black. The yellow is the lightest resistance, and then as you go up there in the colors towards the black, they're harder to pull apart, or harder to pull, so more resistance. Or even having some small weights, shop bought, like kind of even starting at about 1 kilo or that, 1 to kind of 2 kilos. But even using, like at home, 2 tins of beans, 2 small bottles of water. You don't need to be going out and buying things. You'll find something kind of at home. But if you want to be kind of trying to introduce maybe a little bit of strength work, that's really important. And we even kind of see, the evidence would show us that as we get older, kind of upper arm strength, is so important, and it's something that we even more so maybe as women than men, but we lose quite significantly. And it's really important even for the basic things of as we get older into that over 65 category, like things like pushing ourselves up into standing. You need that arm strength to do that, and it's really important. So for any exercise session that you're doing and kind of trying to stay healthy at home, I would always recommend that you always do a warm-up thoroughly before your training session. And that might be just even some bit of, kind of a more slower walk. You can do some stretches with that, but you want to raise your heart rate a little bit and prepare you for your kind of main part of a training session. The important thing would be to keep hydrated before, during, and after a training session. Refuel after your training session, so make sure that you're eating something afterwards. Maybe not a chocolate bar, but kind of something that kind of you feel will kind of give you back what you've kind of lost. And then the idea would be that week on week that you're progressing on in a gradual manner. You're increasing your intensity, you're increasing your maybe frequency, or increasing the amount that you're doing. And generally that's by about 10% every week on week. And then appropriate footwear. So, definitely if you're doing something like walking, and definitely for, I often give a lot of footwear advice to a lot of you guys who would attend us in the National Coagulation Centre. Good footwear if you're walking, so good shock absorbency, good cushioning, and generally, unfortunately, we have to spend a little bit more sometimes, but there are always sales, there's always kind of things at the minute, so it's always good to kind of keep an eye out. And if there's a runner you find that you like, stick with it, or a pair of shoes, a pair of hiking boots, anything like that, or walking shoes. If there's something you like, stick with it, because it can be very hard to kind of keep finding the one that you like. So I've spoken about, and I know I've spoken about this before in previous kind of talks, but moderate intensity exercise, it's a brisk walk, it's dancing, gardening, hoovering, cycling. It's where we start to get that heart rate up. So how should you feel? You should be able to talk, but you can't sing the words to a song. And you can measure it using your heart rate. So you're aiming for 50 to 70% of your maximum heart rate. So again, to find out what your maximum heart rate is, it's 220 minus your age is your maximum heart rate. And then you work out what half to 50 to 70% of that number is. So that gives you kind of an idea of what kind of moderate intensity is. Another way of kind of rating it, or trying to see if you can't count your heart rate, another way is using, and we would use this a lot for patients in the hospital. It's the Borg rating of perceived exertion. So how do I feel I am when I'm working out? And the idea for moderate activity is really that you're in that kind of green band. It's somewhat hard to hard, and you should again, you should feel that you're able to talk, but you can't sing. And you should feel that you're getting warm, that your heart rate is up, that your breathing is a little bit faster. So look, there's loads of resources out there, and I suppose I just wanted to kind of highlight a few different things. And I'm not saying that these are going to be for everybody, but I suppose I live within the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown council area, and over the past year they have been doing so many different events in conjunction with their kind of the DLR sports, the Dún Laoghaire-Rathdown kind of sports partnership. They've run couch to 2Ks, couch to 3Ks, couch to 5Ks. Over the summer I started the couch to 5K with them, and I have to say, you were put into a WhatsApp group. There was amazing motivation from the other people that were all doing this virtually, but everyone would kind of check in on the 3 days a week or the 4 days when we were doing the runs, and the motivation that you got from others, I have to say, is definitely what spurred me on. I hate doing anything on my own. Always like to do it with somebody, and that's hard at the minute, but I suppose having some element of accountability to kind of feel like, yeah, I've done my run, I've done my walk, or whatever it is. But they were also doing kind of mindfulness type walks. They were doing loads of different things. So it's not just running, but even at the minute, this week, the Operation Transformation is kind of coming to a close now. I haven't been following it, but I know that Healthy Ireland have been promoting the virtual 5K, and that can, you can do that walking, cycling, running, whatever you want to do. So that's on this week, kind of tomorrow, Friday, Saturday, and then you book it on there's a link and you book it on Eventbrite. But again, it's kind of, while we're in this kind of virtual world, and often we're not kind of maybe seeing other people to maybe catch up with and maybe meet for a walk or that. And gyms are closed if you were going to one, or swimming pools are closed, which I know a number of you would have been swimming. So there's different things out there. So like obviously Sports Ireland, Healthy Ireland, they all have loads of information out there about different activities. And the whole idea is that we're trying to promote physical activity in Ireland, and we're trying to get Ireland active. Another one is things like, and this is across the country, so it's not just Dublin, the park runs. Again, you don't have to run these are walks, and hopefully, I think they're kind of happening to some degree virtually at the minute, but there's loads of things out there. I know in Dublin we've got loads of our public swimming pools as well across the thing. And again, the over 55s or over 60s, there's a reduced membership for those. And, I'm sure across the country again that there are similar. What I will say about swimming pools at the minute is hydrotherapy pools are open from the point of view of therapy. So if there are people who normally would go to a swimming pool and maybe do their, help them from an arthropathy point of view, and it might be, if you're interested in something like hydrotherapy, that is available at the minute during these level 5 restrictions. So this came up at EHAD recently. Lou Sayers, the physio up in Belfast, mentioned it, and I kind of thought it was quite interesting. So it's based on work by Professor Nanette Moutry. She's a professor of physical activity for health in the University of Edinburgh, and she came up with this thing called park power. Never heard of it before, but I suppose it's very similar to kind of some of our parks around the country where you'd have a lot of the machines and that, but this was more 9 very simple exercises. They were strength and balance, and she originally designed it for like signs in the park, but the idea was that you could easily adopt them to kind of do them in your own home. And what she kind of advises is that you consider taking 5 minutes to do these strength and balance exercises. You aim for at least twice a week, but every other day is a nice goal as well. And that's probably, I would kind of say every other day is a nice one. Initially, you try for 10 repetitions of each exercise. And again, you have to remember your own ability and what you feel you're able to do. If that seems too much, she'd say aim for 5 and build it up. If that seems too easy, you try 3 sets of 10, or you add resistance by using maybe handheld weights, cans of beans, milk bottles filled with water to some of the exercises. So they are, I don't have pictures of them, but I have other exercises later, but they are things like sit to stand. And this is one that we would have used in our exercise class. It's a really nice one, and there is a test to see how many sit to stands you can do in 30 seconds or a minute, and it's a really nice outcome measure. Arm raises, just raising your arms out to the side 10 times. A bench press, so she would say like a railing in the park, that you're literally doing kind of a push up off the railing, off the countertop, and that would be the same as kind of doing like a press up against the wall. But as soon as you come down slightly more, it's obviously more harder. Bicep curls, calf raises, pushing up onto your toes. In sitting, front knee extension, so straightening out your knee. A heel toe walk, so really accentuating. And for that one, she was kind of saying, you might hold on to something and then ultimately kind of come off it. Leg flexion, so that's your hamstring curls, like in standing, bending your knee, and then a one leg stand for balance. So these are all really simple things that you can do at your kitchen. You can do at your kitchen counter. You can do on your kitchen chair. These are not difficult, and actually, some of these are. When I kind of had added that in after when I was doing the presentation, I'd already kind of done a bit, I suppose, about around haemophilia and strengthening, and trying to, I suppose, from that point of view, stay healthy currently at home. Obviously, your main targets should be strengthening around your ankles, knees, and elbows. I would definitely always recommend some core exercises, so strengthening up your core, and then obviously some balance work. So at home at the minute, these are things that you could do. And again, if you have any queries, like link in with myself, link in with Mark, there's no problem. And some of them you'll have seen before. So things like the ankle. So, obviously we want to have a nice strong calf to help support your ankle. So, but you can also do this in the other direction as well to strengthen your muscles at the front of the kind of shin as well. But using a TheraBand, very simple, pushing down into the band, nice and easy. If you find heel raises in standing too much for your ankles, if your arthropathy is that bad, well, do them in a seated position. If you find that you're well able to push up on the 2 feet with kind of supporting yourself on a kitchen counter, windowsill, solid chair that's not going to move on you, well, you can move on to single leg heel raises. There's always a progression on, and I suppose there's something, as I'm saying, there's something for every ability as well. So kind of going back to kind of, again, the guidelines, there's something for every level, and it's kind of finding where you'd fit. So some simple exercises there. Kind of moving on to the knee, any of you who've probably had any knee arthropathy, any of you who've maybe post-op surgeries or anything, or even prehab in relation to kind of pre-surgery, kind of getting ready, you'll have seen the straight leg raise exercise. You'll have been given maybe a quads drill for kind of the bed, so that's one of them. There's easier ones even than that. A lot of you maybe have done like a wall slide or a mini squat. Now that might be limited if your ankles are fused, or if you have bad ankle arthropathy. So again, we often have to mix and match, and we have to think about what's happening maybe above and below as well when we're kind of prescribing exercises. Then in standing, you can do like an end range knee extension, again with TheraBand, pushing back into the band. Again, that's a really kind of nice one sometimes to kind of get that weight bearing through the leg while also strengthening. And again, you can use kind of, you can do these exercises at the bottom, straightening out the knee. So that was one of the ones from that Park Power, or again, pulling the foot back against the band. You can do those even without the bands. You're making the muscles kind of work, you're activating them. So generally what we'd say is the idea would be to kind of maybe start at about 6 to 8 repetitions. You want to try and see, is that pushing you towards kind of tiring the muscle a little bit? If not, then you could add in a resistance, you could add in an ankle weight, you could add on a TheraBand. And at that point, if that's kind of getting you're really targeting kind of that both strength and endurance into the muscle, and it's kind of a nice way to start. So then if we move up to the elbow, we obviously want to work both our biceps, the front of the arm, and the triceps at the back. So again, you can use a weight, or you can use a TheraBand, and same with elbow extension. And there's a couple of different ways that we often do the elbow extension, and again, depending on the person. So again, you can do your band, you can pull it down to straighten out the elbow, or often, like we give this one, straightening out the elbow kind of up in the air, and again, it allows for some nice shoulder control. But that could be something that again, you don't do in sitting, you do in lying. And then kind of another one there, a nice one, is the wall press. So and again, you can make that more difficult by kind of starting up against a wall and then ultimately coming down onto a counter, making it more difficult. But again, this is trying to target different abilities, and again, you just find what works for you. So these are some exercises you can do. Some of them you might find actually, they're not comfortable to use a band maybe for the bicep curl. But even if you make a fist and you're supporting your elbow with your other hand, and I would always say, I'd always support the arm with the other hand, even bending up with a fist, you're making your bicep work more than it had been, if that makes sense. So kind of moving on to core exercises, to be honest, I put the bridge in here. The bridge is a brilliant exercise. It's a really nice one to try and get the core activated. And you can kind of do it in different ways, and you can make it more difficult. You can add in a band to really make your kind of hips kind of work a little bit more, as well as your core. You can add a band in and around the knees. So again, trying to keep those knees separate. And again, that's going to activate your glutes a bit more in your bottom, which helps support your hips. And the whole thing about the core is, if you have a strong supported core, that has a real knock-on effect up and down kind of your body, up and down the chain. So if you've good control around your core, your hips, that's going to have a really good help for your knees and down to your ankles. So it's really, really important not to forget that. So, and then finally, kind of balance exercises. So again, kind of if we're thinking about balance, kind of things like standing on one leg. So you can initially do it, holding on to something like the kitchen counter, just standing onto that one leg and even holding that for 5 seconds, and gradually kind of reducing the amount of support that you are taking kind of from the counter. So maybe one finger, even the amount, even that proprioception, that support that you get from one finger on a counter is actually significant to taking that away and having no support at all. So again, it's a really nice way of working on the balance. And then like you can progress on. So I definitely often say to people, yeah, you can do it in your shoes, or, if you do it in your bare feet, maybe first thing in the morning, or kind of maybe kind of when you're going to bed at the kitchen counter, or at like your, when you're washing your hands or doing your teeth or whatever. So you do it like even holding for 5-10 seconds and gradually building it up. And then you can make it harder by throwing a pillow on the ground and trying to stand on a pillow. So that's trying to reinforce kind of things like if you were to walk on an uneven surface, if you were to walk on a beach on sand, whenever that will be allowed again and we get to the beach, if you're walking on gravel, or if you're walking on little stones, pebbles on the beach, things like that, an uneven surface. So it makes you have to work a little bit harder. And finally, like, we would then kind of use things like wobble boards kind of at higher levels. And again, you progress that on to trying to keep the balance and keep the board level, to progressing people on to further like throwing, catching a ball, maybe doing a little squat while you keep it level. So kind of loads of things like that. So I suppose that gives you a good idea. Like these are all things that you can all do at home. So I suppose it's just kind of giving you an idea of that there are simple things that you can do 5-10 minutes a day, every second day, a few times a week, and they're helping you build up that strength and achieve those strengthening that's achieving that part of, I suppose, the guidelines of the strength. Now, Brian has asked me to talk about kind of wearable devices, and this is something that came up, I suppose, hugely when we did our exercise class. People were really, really interested about kind of the technology, really, which is great. And there's so much out there. I suppose to track your physical activity, track your heart rate, kind of see, are you working at that moderate intensity activity? So most of us have smartphones now. A smartphone, most of them are I have an iPhone. It is not an up-to-date one. It's quite an old one, but it'll tell me how many steps I've done in the day if I have it in my pocket. It'll tell me how many minutes of exercise, and it'll also tell me how many minutes I've been, or hours I've been standing. And that's a really, really nice one when you're thinking of that sedentary behavior. So then there's like obviously more of a wearable device like a watch, or an activity monitor. So obviously that's going to achieve, it's going to look at your heart rate, it's going to capture that, and that can tell you whether you're in that light, moderate, vigorous intensity activity, and tell you how many minutes you're within that. So then you can track over the week, well, how many minutes of activity was I doing? So a lot of, some people might even have something already, but it is becoming a more achievable option for a lot more people to have something like this. So if you're kind of looking kind of at them, I kind of did a little bit of research, but like if you're looking just for a physical activity tracker, generally they start at around €50. For that, you can track your 24-hour heart rate. You can get your daily activity tracker. It can track your sleeping pattern. And in some of the more expensive ones, as you kind of go in, and they kind of, do go up a bit, you will kind of get a built-in GPS tracker. So that is in the more expensive models. And obviously it's a generally, even those activity trackers are a watch as well. So it tells the time, that helps. The fitness watches then, they kind of start where the physical activity trackers kind of stop. So they kind of start at your €150 and keep going up. And look, there's so many different brands of these. You've got your Apple Watches and your Fitbits and your Garmin's, and there's probably a rake of others. But I suppose what that's going to get you is it's going to track your steps, your activity minutes, your distance, calories, heart zones. So it's going to tell you your intensity. And on the newer ones, which is something now, it's going to tell you your oxygen saturation. So that's something definitely since COVID that has been added in. It can do an ECG. Now it won't tell you what in a right. It won't tell you what's wrong, but it'll tell you if your ECG is normal, I think. And it'll also often do a breathing rate. And on loads of them now, um they give you little alerts to say, okay, stop, do some breathing, just take a minute, and it kind of tells you to take a couple of deep breaths in and out. um it tells you to stand if it feels you've been sitting too long. So there's all these alerts to kind of, I suppose, help us, if we feel, and some of us need that, we need a bit more of that motivation, that impetus to kind of get us going. um So, and another thing, I'd spoken to Brian about, and definitely this was another one that would have come up after our exercise class, was what app is a good app? And really, to be honest, I am not an expert on this, but I have used one or two of these before. I've used the Map My Walk, I've used the Map My Run, so they're obviously, the Map My Walk is definitely free. The Map My Run, I'm not 100% sure, but the Map My Walk will tell you, once you switch it on and say you're starting your walk, it'll tell you how long you've gone for, it'll tell you the distance, it'll tell you what pace you've gone at, the calories, it'll give you an overall average, and oh yeah, and it gives you your average pace over your time. So again, you don't have to be, running. There's other ones. The Google Fit activity tracker actually looks quite interesting as well, look quite nice, quite easy to use. I haven't used it. Runkeeper is the one obviously powered by ASICS. There's a Nike training club, and again, that wasn't just running, it was loads of different activities, and I think they had maybe some, and that's free as well, some kind of classes and things like yoga or Pilates, that I think you could do through that. And then there was the Fitness Buddy, again, to kind of track your overall kind of exercise and that. So a lot of these ones, kind of when I kind of tried to look at what were the top ones, I suppose, in 2020, these were a lot of the ones that kind of came up with regards physical activity tracking, and kind of just general kind of fitness. So I'm just going to finish up by, I'm just looking at the time, hopefully I'm not going too long, so apologies. Just looking at the physio exercise class that we ran last year, just to give you an idea about that, because we will be rolling this out again for our haemophilia population through the NCC, and it'll be for all adult haemophiliacs, we'd hope. So basically, it was an initiative we started last February. We had 7 participants. It was a 30-minute education session and a 60-minute gym-based exercise class. And our plan was that we'd run it for about 6 to 8 weeks. So we had 7 males with haemophilia. We had 5 severes, 1 moderate and 1 mild, and who completed the 8-week program. 3 of our classes were gym based, and then obviously COVID came along in March, and we had to stop all of our face-to-face consultations, and it took us about 4 to 6 weeks to get back up and running. But then we were back up and running by the start of May, and we had 5 classes that we completed virtually. And they were really successful. The exercise class incorporated a warm-up, some aerobics, which we started off. So previously we would have gone on the old guidelines, and we started with that 10-minute moderate intensity activity. And we got up to about 12 and a half minutes. We got up to 30-second jogs on the spot. And these were, some of our severe guys would have had significant ankle arthropathy. Some of them had an ankle fusion. We had patients with knee replacements, hip replacements. So it was really kind of a good, kind of, I suppose, it gave us a good kind of feedback on how successful it was. So obviously we did some strengthening components, flexibility components, and obviously the important thing about this is it was tailored to each participant. We individualized it. If we had to change a way an exercise had to be done, we were able to kind of show somebody a different way to do it, but still with the same outcome. So on the left there is our kind of gym where we would have done the classes. So we kind of have all the different equipment within the physio department. So we're no longer for those of you who might have been a few years since you were in the physio department, we're no longer over in the prefab, obviously. at the Rialto Gate. We are over at the far end of the campus in the ground floor of Hospital 4, which is opposite the blood transfusion building there. So we're over at the St. James's entrance end. And then there's a couple of pictures of me and Mark doing our class virtually. So the education sessions then, so we did a 30-minute education session. We kind of looked at some of the reasons why we were doing the class. And look, a lot of this is based on the research that Megan Kennedy did through the IPAT study. And really so we were giving some general information on kind of cardiometabolic risk factors. We looked at the physical activity guidelines. We looked at sleep, bone health, and Patricia, our clinical psychologist, did one on behavior change as well. So I think they were kind of the main things. So we did an initial focus group, and I will say that all of those kind of things, and a number of them that we did the education components on, came from this initial focus group. So the initial focus group highlighted kind of barriers to exercise, so why some of the participants didn't do anything. And one, things like looking back at that they had lack of prophylaxis as children, so that was possibly an element of fear factor there, and that as children that they wouldn't have participated in sports or physical education classes. So I will say the age group in our class was kind of early 40s into 50s. So that was kind of the age group that we had in the class. So there was some anxieties around kind of gyms, gym equipment, kind of had never used it. And they were really interested in kind of trying different ones that they had heard about or kind of knew that might be useful. They were interested in what they should be doing and the potential health benefits exercise could have for them. And they were interested in the technology around physical activity and monitoring of their activity. So when we look kind of at kind of the gym versus the virtual class, so in the feedback we got at the end, when we kind of had a chat with a number of them at the end, some of the pros that they kind of said for the gym-based class was obviously it was tailored to them. They got to try out the gym equipment, and again broke down some of those anxieties around gym equipment. The cons obviously are commute into the hospital, parking around the hospital. Whereas with the virtual class, again, kind of well structured, they felt it was more productive. They felt it was more of a flow, and really possibly it might have been that we cut out some of the chat that was occurring in the gym-based class, and we were able to kind of keep moving through kind of from a very much of a warm-up through to kind of a little bit of muscle activation, into some aerobic, into some strengthening, into some cool down. So there definitely probably we got through our 60 minutes quicker. Time, obviously no travel time. So once they switched on for their Zoom class, it was 60 minutes and that was it. The one thing that did come up, I suppose, the virtual class was that they were worried that maybe we couldn't see them doing things at all times. And I suppose that's something that we'll carry forwards to make sure that if people are setting up stuff, that we can see them if they are going down onto the floor to do certain exercises and that. But our main findings were that we had no adverse events throughout it. All of the patients or all of the participants found it really enjoyable. They were all delighted with how they progressed. They would have liked for it to continue weekly. They all felt stronger after the program. They felt more inclined to continue with some element of exercise. So I'm not sure if that did happen. And they thought that the hairband was a great adjunct for the virtual class. So it's something that's we were able to send out in the post, and we then were able to progress that on as the classes went on. So with regards to the class, our plans for 2021 are we're hoping to roll it out again. I suppose it's kind of on pause because we've been waiting for ethics to come through, and I really hope it's coming through this month or next, because this time we got up and running very quickly the last time, and this time what we want to do is we really want to gather data on our next rollout. So we want to look at the health benefits that people will gain from over the 6 to 8 week supervised exercise program. We would aim to both look at a virtual model and a gym-based program, and also our plan would be to look at different age groups. So we are recruiting participants. So if I don't know how many people are on the call now, but if anybody is interested in it from the haemophilia side of things, that's my email address. And even if you want to drop me an email and say it is something you'd be interested in, at least I can make note of your name, and we can kind of keep it on track then. So that is me done and dusted. I'm sorry that probably took a lot longer. I'll stop sharing my screen there now.
Yeah.